All right. Hey again. Thanks for joining us for another episode of SmokeN'Science. Thank you to everyone who continues to leave us reviews on Apple and Spotify. It helps us a ton. Today, I want to share a comment from Spoonie May. They say, "This is my favorite new podcast. Cannabis helped me get off detrimental pharmaceuticals and helps me have a quality of life even with debilitating chronic conditions. As a former pharmaceutical compounder and forever chemistry lover, I absolutely adore you both and share the useful science that you share." Thank you so much, Spoonie May.
Thanks so much for your support. So, in today's episode, we'll cover part two of Cannabis and Pain. We're going to discuss some specific conditions where cannabis can help with inflammatory and chronic pain, like migraines, fibromyalgia, arthritis, and endometriosis. Then we'll talk about some different administration methods for using cannabis as a medicine.
We'll also include a very special interview from a friend of ours here at smokenol, who will discuss their journey with chronic pain, addiction, and finding relief in cannabis medicine.
All right, let's do it. Welcome to SmokeN'Science. Nothing but the facts about our favorite plant. All right, so let's start with a review of what we covered last time, clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, which is the mechanism that many people have that may be causing their chronic pain. So clinical endocannabinoid deficiency is a theory that describes that some of us have lower levels of circulating endocannabinoids than others.
Yeah, so just to review, those endocannabinoids are what our body makes that interact with receptors in our body, and they maintain the homeostasis or the balance within our body. So if your body is not able to make a lot of these endocannabinoids, it can lead to some chronic conditions. And I always associate like chronic conditions that we don't have a treatment for that seem to be the reoccurring themes in CED.
And because the endocannabinoid system is so prevalent all over the body and is involved in so many different processes, this is one of the reasons why clinical endocannabinoid deficiency can take form in many different symptoms. And we are going to cover some of the most common today, which is migraines, fibromyalgia, and irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. And all of these have a lot of data supporting the fact that part of the mechanism for causing them may be due to the people who are patients who have these disorders having lower levels of circulating endocannabinoids.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic to read on, especially if you suffer from one of these conditions. So we're going to attach a paper if you go to the link on our podcast that is authored by Dr. Ethan Russo, who is the scientist who coined this theory of CED. All right, let's start off with migraines because a lot of people suffer from migraines. Migraines are defined as a recurrent throbbing headache that typically affects one side of the head and is often accompanied by nausea and disturbed vision. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I was going to say, recently it's been shown that while people are having a migraine attack, they have alterations in their endocannabinoid levels, and that in general, this does make sense because when people are having migraines, they are hypersensitive. Often you are really sensitive to like light or smell.
Yeah, and we know that nausea and vomiting is also a part of migraine symptoms, and that is also heavily linked to the endocannabinoid system. We know we have cannabinoid receptors in that portion of the brain that controls your emetic or vomiting response.
One thing that I think is really interesting about the overlap of migraines and cannabis is that historically cannabis was used for migraines as the number one treatment pre-pharmaceuticals. I believe this is the early 1900s, late 1800s. Cannabis was the number one treatment for migraines, and it's effective for a lot of people for reducing the acute pain that you get when you are having a migraine, and it's also been effective it seems, in preventing people from getting migraines and or just reducing the number of migraines that they get.
Yeah, I was gonna start that conversation of, do you think, a preventative way of using cannabis for migraines, or do you think it's once you feel the symptoms starting, that's when you would use cannabis as medicine to kind of help with the symptoms of migraines?
I think it could be a little bit of both. So that's the interesting thing about CED, or clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, is that there are two pieces to it. There's the lower circulating endocannabinoids, and then there's also all of the changes that our body goes through because there are lower levels of circulating endocannabinoids. So for those two different reasons, I think that it's like a little bit of both. It's like when you take cannabis and you're activating those CP1 receptors, you can reduce some of the pain because you're mimicking the endocannabinoids. So it's one possible way. And then also on the flip side, if you regularly use cannabis, you are changing the levels of CB1 receptors and other receptors as well. Migraines have been linked to the serotonin system. Many of the pharmaceutical drugs that are used for migraines target serotonin receptors. And using cannabis has been shown to alter the levels of serotonin receptors that are linked to CB1 receptors directly. And in addition, the endocannabinoid system regulates the serotonin system in a number of ways. It changes like the amount of serotonin that gets released, and it changes the number of serotonin receptors that are present. And it also directly affects serotonin signaling, specifically on the same neurons that release those serotonin molecules.
Yeah,
So we don't get into it too much in this episode, but I just want to touch on the fact that cannabidiol, or CBD, has also shown early promise for the use of migraines. This makes sense because migraines and seizures share a lot of common mechanism in the brain. Also, CBD activates the serotonin 5-HT1A receptor as part of its mechanism of action. As I just mentioned, a lot of migraine medications target the serotonin system.
when you're introducing molecules that interact with receptors in your body's going to either make more or less, or even take away some of those receptors to kind of control what effects it has on you. It's kind of a way of adapting, sort of, for your body to adapt to these different levels of chemicals in your body. So what I was just thinking is, someone wanted to control their migraines with cannabis. I'm thinking that possibly using kind of a low dose of an edible, if you don't like smoking, could be beneficial for normal days. And then maybe having some sort of vaporizer, inhaler, or a joint if you like smoking, or some smoking device, in case you feel those symptoms start to come on. You want kind of a rapid way of relieving those symptoms. So you don't want to take an edible when you feel the symptoms come on, because edibles can take 2 hours to work, right? You would want something a bit faster.
Right. And migraines there's a progression that occurs with them. There's often a prodromal phase where some people get auras and you could sense that a migraine is going to occur. And then there's like an initial phase, and then typically migraines will move around your head as they disappear. And generally speaking, even with the pharmaceutical medications that reduce the pain of migraines, they're called abortives. Generally speaking, even with those, they're more effective the earlier and faster you take them. So absolutely, like smoking or inhaling or vaping would be a faster onset in that case. And one thing that I think we should mention, although I think we might need to do an entire separate episode on this one, but there's been a lot of recent success for both migraines and cluster headaches with targeting the serotonin system using psychedelics, using mushrooms.
Definitely. And I think we should do an entire episode on that, because I know that a lot of people have asked us about using other natural products such as psilocybin-containing mushrooms for chronic conditions. So I think that'd be a really interesting topic.
And they work together with cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. That's another thing that is not, it's not often talked about, but it's qualitatively in the population used together quite often.
Okay, let's say that you don't suffer from migraines or any other chronic illness. Well, you might have noticed that cannabis also works extremely well for relieving hangovers. That's because hangovers are caused by inflammation. So when you use cannabis, when you're feeling hungover, you have that throbbing headache and you feel nauseous and like you're going to vomit, cannabis can come to the rescue. It can immediately reduce that inflammation in your brain and make you feel a lot less sick.
But to switch gears, we're going to talk about the next cluster of symptoms or diagnosis, fibromyalgia, that is linked to clinical endocannabinoid deficiency. This one is an interesting and broad disorder. So fibromyalgia really doesn't have a mechanism, and that's a huge problem. But it's essentially chronic pain.
Yeah, it's chronic musculoskeletal pain, so it's sometimes really hard to even figure out as a location of the pain because it can really feel like it's everywhere.
And it's different for different people. Again, I mean, similar to many of these chronic conditions, you get a clustering of unique symptoms for each person. If we're going along the theme here is that if this is caused by the endocannabinoid system, it does make sense because each of us has so many variations in different parts of our body where our endocannabinoid system plays a big role that this could be a piece of it. But the current belief that is for one of the main causes of fibromyalgia is that it's caused by a hypersensitization of the central nervous system. If you recall in our past episode, we were talking about these pain signals, the pain signals that get sent from our body through our spinal cord to our brain that cause this pain. Fibromyalgia is caused when there is in the spine and in the brain a hypersensitization to these signals. And actually, it really does make a lot of sense then that this would be caused by lower levels of endocannabinoid signaling.
Oh yeah, when you read like an overactive central nervous system, to me this is screaming dysregulation and endocannabinoid system because that is what it is involved in, and that is what your endocannabinoid system does. It brings regulation, it brings homeostasis. And this, I believe, is definitely a CED disease.
I mean, this is probably the most fundamental reasons why, if you were to give like the one reason why every like warm-blooded animal has an endocannabinoid system, it is to prevent the hypersensitization of our central nervous system. So I completely agree. And one of the ways in which cannabis would help combat this would be to mimic the endocannabinoids. And then another thing that is an interesting link to fibromyalgia is that trauma has been identified as a potential cause for fibromyalgia. Not necessarily trauma like physical injury, but trauma like CPTSD or PTSD, traumatic life events, has been linked to be a potential cause for fibromyalgia. And even though PTSD isn't one of the most well studied for clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, there's a lot of growing evidence in the scientific literature that PTSD is linked to lower levels of endocannabinoids and to higher levels of CB1 receptors. So I thought that this was interesting because it gives another possible mechanism for how cannabis can help with fibromyalgia, because regular cannabis use does decrease your levels of CB1 receptors in parts of your brain. We talk about it most often as tolerance.
So do we know why trauma leads to this?
It's unclear. One of the things, like, this is also just an entire like opinion theory thought that I'm having that I'm not sure if there's any scientific literature behind, is that if you experience trauma, usually you have adrenaline, you have like a lot of activation. Your brain is very activated, right? There's the fight or flight mode. You're heightened. All of your senses are heightened, and that this can cause maybe an overcompensation potentially, where then your body ends up having, since it's so sensitized, it upregulates. I know at least with physical injuries, you upregulate the endocannabinoid system a ton when you have a physical injury, and then potentially there's some sort of like we were talking about earlier with the balance or an opposite reaction where then the body would then decrease the levels of endocannabinoids. But I don't think it's well understood.
Yeah, I would think with physical trauma, part of that level of endocannabinoid increase would be due to the inflammatory response, right? Your body's trying to immediately compensate for that physical trauma. But it is very interesting to think about what the causes of other traumas and increases in endocannabinoids would be.
Yeah, and with pain specifically, since it's such a subjective and complicated metric, it does make a lot of sense. I think that there's a huge overlap in hypersensitive people who are hypersensitive to pain, or people who have chronic pain, and people who have hypersensitivities in other aspects of their life as well. And that I think that we've yet to fully understand how any type of trauma affects your neurodiversity overall. Like what are the lasting effects of that on the brain, and how does that then contribute to like what the symptoms you feel in your physical body? There's this really great book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a really difficult read, also, just as a trigger warning for anyone out there who has trauma in their past. But it's really, really interesting, and it goes through the science of what we know between the brain and the body connection, specifically having to do with trauma. And I think if I were to reread it now through the lens of clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, I'm sure that there would be a lot more there, actually, because there's these links between our brain and our body that we still have yet to fully piece apart. And the endocannabinoid system is participating at every stage, pretty much at every single stage in between our brain and the rest of our body, especially when it comes to sensing any sort of pain, or, I mean, honestly, it's when it comes to sensing any sort of external stimulus, because the endocannabinoid system basically, it gates exactly what you were saying, like regulates and gates all of these signals.
Yeah, and I think something really interesting about fibromyalgia, again, that just reiterates how connected this is with CED, is it can occur alone, but it's often comorbid or reoccurring with other conditions like irritable bowel syndrome and tension headaches, and also autoimmune disorders characterized by inflammation like rheumatoid arthritis. So again, this is all connected to other CED diseases, and I think the data is just mounting for fibromyalgia.
Hey, it's time to take a quick break. But before that, let's recap what we've covered so far. Clinical endocannabinoid deficiency occurs when someone has lower levels of circulating endocannabinoids. Unfortunately, there is no test for doctors to diagnose this yet, but there is a lot of evidence supporting CED as a mechanism for migraines, fibromyalgia, and GI issues like IBS. Cannabis can help in two different ways. First, it mimics the endocannabinoids and tricks the body into thinking there are more of them there. But it can also alter levels of receptors in the endocannabinoid system and other related systems like serotonin. Now we'll hear from our teammate and the co-inventor of SmokeNol, Andy, as he highlights a personal healing journey of cannabis and pain. Then we'll get back to the science, focusing on GI issues, endometriosis, and covering some practical applications like methods of administration and dosing for chronic pain.
Smokenol is a unique cannabis extract that feels more like smoking compared to traditional edibles. That's because it's actually extracted from cannabis smoke. Smokenol can be incorporated into a variety of formulations, including edibles, tinctures, and capsules. And smokenol extraction is fast, easy, and requires very little upfront investment. If you work at a dispensary or are involved in cannabis processing and are interested in incorporating smokenol formulations for your products, contact the link below or send us a message on Instagram. Smokenol. We smoked it for you. So I'd like to introduce someone. This is Conor Valliere. Conor's a close friend of mine. We've known each other our entire lives. Conor's a legacy grower, a very, very talented cultivator, and someone that's helped people from all walks of life, including many, many veterans and people dealing with all different kinds of pain, to learn about cannabis and how you can use it for pain relief and anxiety relief, and particularly how to grow it and grow it really well. Cannabis has helped Conor recover from a crazy, life-changing injury. He was hit by a truck years ago, and cultivating cannabis and using cannabis is really what got him through and what gets him through every day today. So introducing you to Conor Valliere.
Well, I guess it was a long time ago, but 2009, I was just motorcycle accident, hit by a truck in Florida. I landed inside the bed, so I don't think the guy could take off or leave me in the ditch or anything, or anything like that. I think he might have tried. So until he realized I was inside of the bed of his truck. But the ambulance came. Thank God. I was out, instant coma, instant. Legs just bone sticking out. Must have been. I couldn't imagine that scene. Yeah, head injury, all that stuff. Hand fell off. Yeah, it was pretty brutal afterwards. After I woke up, broken bones were nothing. Those heal so fast, and you get over that, and you start walking again. You put a little, but it was all this nerve pain I had, in my foot from all the broken bones. They said it was referred pain. I don't know what that is really, but it's just.
So just wanted to jump in here and explain what referred pain is. Referred pain is when you feel pain at a different location from where the source of the pain actually is. So in this case, Conor's referred pain was felt in his foot, but was likely from his central nervous system and the horrible injuries he had to the rest of his body.
It was nerve pain. I was feeling my foot all the time. That was just unbearable. I used to say it was if you put your foot in the snow till it was almost frostbitten or something, and then running under hot water immediately, that pain that you would get. It was that for 6 to 8 months afterwards, or even I would say probably more than a year.
So after a horrible injury like this, like many other people, Conor was actually put on a number of prescription pharmaceuticals and anti-anxiety medications with very little information about how to use these things or how to come off of them properly and safely. They don't always have a positive impact. In Conor's case, they did not. And this next part explains how Conor, like other patients, were unaware of the prescription medications and their potential negative side effects and how to get off of them, and how specifically they can turn into a problem. But more importantly, how cannabis can help get off of those things. Cannabis is often referred to in the past as a gateway drug. A lot of people like to refer to it as an exit drug. In this case, it's an exit drug.
Oh, so many. And not too many people can control that demon, And you're all right. I mean, nobody really knew, but I didn't know any better. My dad was there. He didn't know any better. I don't know. My mom probably didn't know any better at the time. And just, you're done, kid. Here, try these Johnnies. They were giving me the Neurotins and the gabapentins. And I was like, nah, these don't work. And then they gave me the Cymbalta. It's rough getting over it, you got to do, something. You need something to get you through. And the pain honestly was subsiding, but it was still rough, and my back was killing me a little bit. And I don't know, some cannabis is the best. It just kind of makes you dull to the pain and just makes you so you don't care really. And I don't know, helps with the anxiety from all the kicking all those drugs at once. So many things. The Xanax I was taking, and they're not wicked heavy, but he would, the doctors down there would be giving you 150 perk 30s and 50 15s.
In this next bit, we actually asked Conor for some recommendations he had for us and others who are looking for pain relief with cannabis.
If you're in serious pain, you're probably gonna want the heaviest indica you could get, the just most tastiest, relaxing flavor that you enjoy, that will just sedate you so you could sleep and just recover. because that's what the body needs when you're in pain and you just go through that much stuff. Like, I couldn't sleep. Dabs were my savior, I think, really at the end of the day, because I was like using Xanax to get over the opiates in a way, and I was always a bit of a self-medicator, but never kind of like to push things over the edge, because I didn't do this stuff, man. Yeah. I didn't do any of this stuff when I was a kid. I didn't do it to get high. I was in pain. I had a lot of pain, dude, and I needed to get out of that forest of,
Conor's story has really inspired me and many others, and it's the reason why he's in this industry today. Here's where you can find and follow Conor and Frankenstein Genetics.
Yeah, you can find us at frankensteingenetics.com or Instagram with Frankenstein Genetics LLC. We're up there. We're doing it. We're putting some stuff up on there for sale soon. I know it's been a while coming, but we're always hard at work on things right now. And we got some great plants, amazing plants I'm working with here, and from unreal breeders all over the map here.
Conor's story mirrors so many other people who have had success with cannabis. We are really passionate here at Real Isolates about highlighting people who are patients first, just like us. If you're interested in participating, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on Instagram. Now, after another quick message from me about smokenol, we'll get back to the science. Most people prefer the effects of smoking over edibles. The most important reason why is heat transformation of cannabinoids, the active ingredients in cannabis. Unlike conventional edibles, edibles made with smokenol contain heat-transformed cannabinoids from smoke. Edibles made with smokenol feel more like smoking. If you are a product manufacturer, contact us today. Smokenol, we smoked it for you.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about some GI issues. So things like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, or irritable bowel syndrome, also known as IBS. These are kind of characterized by inflammation and an autoimmune response.
Right. I think inflammation regularly gets associated with like swelling, and it's quite often, GI issues are a perfect example of where you can get swelling of your abdomen in that area, but in reality, that inflammation can be completely like silent in terms of like the physical thing that you're seeing, other than like abdominal pain or poor absorption. Inflammation in the gut can cause alterations in how you properly are absorbing your nutrients, or whether or not you're processing things correctly. And there's a number of ways that cannabis can help with this, but the number one way, in my opinion, is by reducing the inflammation in your GI tract. And this can be through both edibles or through smoking or inhaling as a method, because the cannabinoids are just powerful anti-inflammatories.
Absolutely. And there's different levels of inflammation, but I think they can be very painful still, right? So THC is definitely helpful, but again, it is psychoactive, so not everyone can use THC. Even in small doses, people have different sensitivities to THC. So maybe using something that's pretty high in CBD, but also has a little bit of THC. So you're helping with that immune response, but you're also helping with a little bit of pain. And then the terpene beta-caryophyllene has also been shown to help with inflammatory response. This terpene is actually able to bind to cannabinoid 2 or CB2 receptors in our body. So the combination of some sort of strain that has high amounts of beta-caryophyllene in it, combined with CBD and THC, I think would be a great method for helping with these GI issues. If you're looking to pick up a strain that's high in beta-caryophyllene, some very popular ones are Baba Kush, Sour Diesel, and ChemDog.
Yeah, and the CB2 receptors are generally associated with the immune system. So it's very possible that this has, in combination, right, a different response or a different effect overall than other strains that are not as balanced. And I think when it comes to GI issues, and there's also nausea can be a part of these disorders. And in general, one of the ways that cannabis helps, just simply put, is that it allows you to eat. again. And getting proper nutrition is so important for your body. And if your body is not able to get food that or the fuel that it needs, then it's going to be in a scarcity, and that causes a huge number of problems. So like simply put, being able to eat is incredibly important, and a lot of us take it for granted if we don't have issues.
Right. So cannabis as medicine here can help you eat, so return nutrients to your body, especially if you have an overactive gut. It can really wipe away a lot of the nutrients in your body. So you can help restore that. You can help reduce the inflammation in your gut. You can help reduce the pain, and you can also change when the gut is inflamed or overactive. It can help slow down the muscle contractions in your gut. Cannabis can, and that might be different for everybody. So you should always start with small amounts of cannabis as medicine and increase slowly as your body tells you what it needs and how it's reacting to that medicine. All right, moving on. Let's talk about endometriosis and biological sex-related effects. So I just want to define what endometriosis is. It is characterized by uterine cells or tissue where it should not be in your body. So those tissues should only be in your uterus. But with endometriosis, those cells and tissues are growing outside of the uterus. So that causes your body to react to these cells because they're where they shouldn't be. So your body's trying to control that. These cells react really uniquely, and they try to keep acting as if they were in the uterus, and they're not. So that can lead to a lot of inflammatory responses in the body.
Yeah, a lot of the interactions between our body at the cellular level, cell to cell, a lot of it has to do with like identifying like versus like, what is and is not there. If you think about the outside of each of the cells of our body as like a key or like a fingerprint, they're very, very unique. And our body is able to sense when something isn't where it's supposed to be based upon this fingerprint on the outside of every cell, which is largely actually made up of sugar molecules. But it's a very, very unique pattern of these sugar molecules that occurs. And in the case of endometriosis, there are cells on the outside, and the way that the body is kind of dealing with that, a piece of why it feels pain is because it identifies that these cells are misplaced. They're not where they should be. I guess that kind of like a splinter, but from the inside of the body.
Yeah. So this endometriosis can be really painful to women, especially during their menstrual cycle, because that's when they're already experiencing pain, but they also have these cells outside of their uterus that are trying to react during their menstrual cycle as if they were in the uterus. And then on top of that, you have your body trying to essentially get rid of these other cells or trying to remove them because they're somewhere they shouldn't be. So it can be very diffuse and poorly localized pain for these women, especially during that time of the month.
And I think that the way that there's a number of ways that cannabis can help, but that one of the main ways it helps with this is by just decreasing the number of pain signals that are being sent from this diffuse, poorly localized area, to the brain. And then I think the other way that it helps is by directly affecting those cells that are attached there.
Those cells in that uterine tissue, they highly express cannabinoid 1 receptors. So this is another piece of evidence that the endocannabinoid system is involved here. And I want to bring up this paper by Ana Sanchez that was published in 2016. It's called Elevated Systemic Levels of Endocannabinoids and Related Mediators Across the Menstrual Cycle in Women with Endometriosis. What I really want to highlight here is that these authors found that there was an increase in circulating endocannabinoids, AEA and 2-HG, with decreased local cannabinoid 1 receptors in endometriosis women versus non, meaning that there's an issue here with this negative feedback loop. It is not homeostatic. It is not balanced in these cases. And this dysregulation leads to that increased pain, that increased inflammation, and and many other symptoms of endometriosis. Well, since we're talking about endometriosis, I want to talk about some different ways of using cannabis or different methods of administration of cannabis as medicine. And here I want to talk about something that is not discussed a lot and is also not available in many places, and that is suppositories. Whether it's vaginal suppositories or anal suppositories, if you suffer from chronic pelvic pain or endometriosis or something localized to that part of your body, it can be really beneficial to have something that is close to the pain source or the inflammatory source.
Or if you have extreme nausea and you cannot keep edibles down, or you don't like smoking, or if you have poor bioavailability. Also, in the method of ingestion would be for suppositories would be like absorption directly through the walls of either your anus or your vagina, and you would not have as much metabolism into 11-hydroxy through that route versus through an edible. So in theory, it would feel different. It would be less 11-hydroxy. So we were using anal and anus here when we should have been using rectal or rectum, because the anus is just the opening and the absorption actually happens in the rectum. Sorry about that.
For any listeners, when you orally take an edible or something that has to go through your gut, the THC is transformed into 11-hydroxy THC, which is a little more potent, actually. So a lot of people don't like the effects of 11-hydroxy. So instead, the other routes of administration, like suppositories, will prevent that metabolite from being produced. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, let's talk about another one that it does not happen for. The other methods that that have limited metabolism are sublingual or subbuccal administration, which is under the tongue or under the cheek. And I am just going to say it again. I don't know what's wrong with my mouth. I cannot absorb anything that way. But for other people whose mouths are able to absorb molecules, you can just place either a tincture. I think usually it's a tincture, So usually, yeah, I've seen other little like self-dissolving tabs coming out where you either place that underneath your tongue or you have a swab for your cheek. And in this case, it would be absorbed there and enter your bloodstream. And again, would have more limited metabolism than an edible, which is absorbed.
It would also act quicker compared to an edible because it's not getting metabolized in your liver, then re-entering your bloodstream, and then going to your brain. It's much faster than that. But the quickest way to feel the effects of cannabis are going to be from inhalation. So either smoking or vaping. And this can be really helpful if you suffer, again, from migraines. If you need something immediate, thinking about inhalation as a method, if you feel it coming on and you want to prevent it from getting really bad, it could be the best method for that, for quick
or nausea, right? You have nausea and you don't want to, eat anything. Right. That's definitely going to be the fastest. It also will not be metabolized, although depending on what temperature you used, it could be altered. At least the smoke could be altered. But let's talk a second about edibles and about this metabolism and this change. This is a piece of why edibles take a long time to be absorbed and to act as well. You eat an edible, it goes into your stomach and into your GI tract. And then the edible, the oil, the cannabis oil, where all of the active molecules are, has to be broken down before it's absorbed. And then it gets metabolized into 11-hydroxy. It's a pretty significant amount, although it changes from person to person. And there's a decent number of people, we found out from TikTok, that can't feel edibles. And I just think that that's worth mentioning because it's never addressed, or it has not been thus far.
Yeah, so we took a social media survey and had well over 10,000 people. Was it 20,000? I
think it was more than 20,000 people, yeah.
More than 20,000 people responded to our survey, and it came out to be about 20% of people can't feel edibles. And these are people who are buying their edibles from like dispensaries. They're not all just making them at home and maybe not doing it right, but it's actually people have trouble feeling edibles. And some people think, I'm just going to take more and more and more, and maybe that will solve the problem. But I personally wouldn't recommend doing that because then you're just putting a lot of cannabis into your body and you're not metabolizing it in the correct way. So you're just building that up, which it might not be great for your metabolizing enzymes to have that much product to get ready to excrete.
Right. In general, the load on any of our organs is easier, you could say, or less invasive the less that we use of it. And definitely, the interesting thing I found about people who can't feel edibles is that these people will still feel an effect from smoking and would take, exponentially larger doses as an edible and not feel it. And this is something that I think is eventually worth investigating because 20% is that's a significant portion of the population. And so for the 20% of you out there that can't feel edibles and you can't use oral administration as a method, you have inhalation, you have suppositories, sublingual, subbuccal, and the last method that we're going to cover today is topicals or transdermal. I love topicals. Personally, I did not think they were legit. I was a big non-believer. Yeah.
Yeah, so I studied topicals in graduate school while I was getting my PhD, CBD topicals. And I think there's this misconception that topicals, like everyone's just slapping CBD into every product on the market and just hoping that people will buy it. But topicals actually have validity. We have cannabinoid receptors all over our skin that topicals can interact with and have a lot of benefits for our body.
And our skin health dictates a lot more than we give it credit for as well. I mean, our skin is the largest organ, and if you have if dysregulation around your skin, it could have additional effects. So topicals don't get absorbed below the skin. That's the difference between a topical versus a transdermal. A topical will just get absorbed into the skin, but we have CB1 receptors on the skin, and there's a lot of evidence that topicals are effective. The only thing where it gets a little hairy is about whether or not a topical will turn into a transdermal, or at what point will there be absorption past the skin into the cells that are below the skin, potentially into the bloodstream, because I personally do believe that it happens, but I don't think that it happens with every formulation. I don't think that it happens with every person's skin. So there's...
The actual health of your skin, if you keep it moisturized and hydrated, it's actually going to really help compounds get through your skin. Whereas if you never use moisturizer, you kind of have scaly skin, that's kind of creating a really rough barrier, and things are not going to go through it as well. So the very top layer of your skin is called the stratum corneum, and this is the issue with getting things into your bloodstream. It really does not like things going through it. So if we want to formulate a product that can actually cross that barrier, we need to, one, study it in a laboratory to see different formulations, how deep they can penetrate, how quick they can penetrate. We want to use different emulsifiers or these solutions that help get the CBD or THC into solution and then help it get through the skin. There's a whole science behind formulations, and I think a lot of products do just use marketing to sell CBD topicals, but I think if the right formulation is produced, you can have some really amazing benefits, whether it's localized pain or inflammation in the case of psoriasis or eczema. You can use those topical products to help, but something that I would look for if I was buying a new topical product is, does it actually tell you how much active ingredient is in there? So if you're looking for a CBD topical, does that product actually tell you this contains 800 milligrams of CBD in the container? Or does it just say full spectrum hemp extract, which a lot of them will, which is fine. I think full spectrum hemp extracts are awesome. But if you're paying top dollar and you don't even know how much CBD is in there, maybe try to look for a different product that actually is telling you how much of that active product is in there. What's important to note here is whatever delivery method you use for your cannabis, it's going to change the bioavailability of the compounds in your sample. So for instance, if you had a CBD topical and a CBD vape, the CBD topical is going to have a very low bioavailability, meaning very small amounts of that CBD are actually going to reach your bloodstream. However, if you were vaping CBD, a lot of that CBD would reach your bloodstream, so that would have a high bioavailability.
That pretty much is a perfect transition to the last piece of it, which has to do with topicals, which is dosing, dosing and tracking. Dosing and tracking for therapeutic effects specifically. And that's one problem with topicals that I think comes about quite often is that, so like you said, you could buy a product and not even know how much CBD is in there. Because if, for example, if you bought a lotion that only has, let's say it doesn't tell you, but let's say that it has 100 milligrams of CBD in that entire bottle, then that means that when you're putting like a squirt of that lotion on your hands, you're possibly only getting like a milligram in that entire area, as opposed to a product that has something like 30 milligrams per per dose. It's unclear whether or not the dose will be effective. And one of the things with topicals that I think is a problem is that we don't dose enough. So because we put the topical on once and we're like, oh, I don't feel anything. You don't put it on again. I've had a lot of success when I apply topicals over and over and over again, like essentially like a dosage, being like, I'm going to continue to increase the dose of the topical every time you put the lotion on is like one dose of it.
And with topicals, we just mentioned that the health of your skin actually helps like the therapeutic efficacy of it. So if you are constantly adding that cream, you're both hydrating your skin and applying more product. So it's going to be more helpful.
And it's important. Yeah, I think it's important to know that you're dosing a topical just like you would dose if you were to like take another hit or eat another edible. It's the same way you dose that way as well. But yeah, that brings us to the last section for this episode, which is talking about how to track therapeutic effects and dose them. Because for pain and for chronic pain, it's pretty difficult, because if you are using cannabis for chronic pain, if you take a break or a tolerance break from using that cannabis, often you can have an increased amount of pain because your main mechanism of reducing your pain is being taken away. So in terms of being able to limit that, I think it's really important. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to try to keep your tolerance really low, which can be difficult.
Yep. And I would say for all of these conditions we talked about today, incorporating both CBD and THC, whatever that ratio is, might differ based on your condition, your body, your tolerance, your administration method. But combining both, since they all really contain a component of inflammation and a component of pain, that would probably be the best method. Now, there's another cannabinoid called CBG, or cannabigerol, that has also been shown to help with pain. However, we don't have a lot of data on what kind of dose we should be taking of CBG, or really, we don't have a lot of data at all on CBG. So we know it's safe overall, but when you're trying to experiment with doses of something like CBG, always start as small as you possibly can. And then, slowly increase. And if you're feeling the benefits or the effects that you want, stay at that dose as long as you can.
Yeah, I completely agree in terms of starting small, working up slowly. And then when you reach the desired effect, monitor whether or not you start needing more. And one of the other advantages of using the other cannabinoids or cycling through and having different tools in your tool belt is that because they are slightly different, they contribute to the tolerance of one another in a different way. If you have a really high THC tolerance, you can potentially alter that by not using just THC products, and by using more balanced products, because you only develop tolerance when you're using one specific molecule in a large amount that then causes your receptors to downregulate, or causes your receptors in the brain to have less of the CB1 receptors. And if you were to use or cycle through others. I get the question often about being able to use CBD and hemp or being able to use lower THC during a tolerance break. I personally think that that's acceptable. I think that your tolerance will not completely 100% reset, right? Or maybe it will take longer or be slower, but you might reduce a lot of the negative effects that you would have otherwise during your tolerance break.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And always with tolerance breaks, I think they're beneficial for a lot of people, but I would recommend slowly decreasing your tolerance, not going from using cannabis every day, multiple times a day, to just stopping. It kind of shocks your brain in a way. Your brain adapts to cannabis. It learns to interact with cannabis. And if you kind of allow it to reach that new position where it has this cannabis supplement and then all of a sudden you just stop, your brain now needs to immediately adjust, and it can be kind of, I don't want to say harmful, but it can be shocking to your brain for sure.
Yeah, you could get negative symptoms. I think people are generally caught in this sort of roller coaster situation where they are either building tolerance or on a tolerance break. And that's kind of a roller coaster for your brain. You're either building tolerance or you're rapidly trying to reduce tolerance. And kind of in contrast to that is a much more gentle or a subtle way of using, where you try not to build tolerance at all by finding what's called the therapeutic minimum, or the minimum possible dosage that you can use to reach an effect, and trying to stay at that for as long as possible. And then when you see that you are developing a tolerance, instead of full blown going on a tolerance break, you can either cycle and use a different cannabinoid, right? Or like maybe use like a high CBD, low THC strain, where you try to like increase your sensitivity again, but not in a way that is super abrupt. And there are withdrawal symptoms to using cannabis, like irritability and sometimes like loss of appetite or sleep, right? And like sleep problems. And I think that there's no reason why you can't avoid a large number of those. At least both of us do. I don't know when the last time I took a full tolerance break was.
Mine was when I went to Paris with my grandma.
Yeah,
and that wasn't really on purpose.
So that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions for us, please drop us a comment on Instagram at smokenol. We really appreciate the feedback and are always looking to include you all in the process. If you are a processor or cannabis dispensary that's interested in partnering with us, please use the contact form in the link in the description. Hope you all have a great day, and we look forward to our next session of Smoke and Science.